we have a board of directors, individuals who are elected to govern our organization. And within the context of that governing body, we've had over the years many opportunities to have significant leadership coming to our agency, providing us with insight to assist us in assessing and directing and providing the services for people with disabilities across the state of Nebraska. One of those individuals is Russell Pierce. Russell was on our board of directors for the period of 1994 to 2001. And the one thing that I particularly found in Russell was that notion of perseverance and courage, which it comes out to being hope. And was that concept of what Russell represented that caused our board of directors to make a decision that what we wanted to do was to recognize Russell with the presentation of a plaque. The other interesting thing about our board of directors is that C.J. Zimmer, who's standing here with me, was also on the board at the time Russell was there. And C.J. was the chairperson of our board of directors. And our board has asked that C.J., because of her tenure, her time on the board with Russell, provide that direct connection of the presentation of this award or plaque to Russell. So I introduce to you C.J. Zimmer.
It's times like this that make me wish I had Russell's speaking skills. Anytime you want to yell amen or break it down for me, sister, or you just go right ahead. I was asked to talk about why Russell is such a respected and revered person in Nebraska. And he has thousands of friends here, some of whom may not know him by name, but all of whom have benefited by the advocacy work he did here. Russell was a person who led me and many others to grow a great deal as advocates. Sometimes I was so distracted by how much I was growing with under Russell's leadership, to notice as he was growing at the same time he was helping others to grow. I had some key words I thought about with Russell. The first word, one, of course, is leader. A leader is defined as someone who doesn't force people to follow. He invites them on a journey, which is certainly something that Russell always did. We served together in Nebraska Advocacy as well as the Mental Health Planning and Evaluation Council. Russell also has a very dignified pride of place about himself. He has never been reluctant, even though he now works in the rarefied atmosphere of Washington. He has never been reluctant to admit where he comes from and who he cares about, which are people back home, advocating for the respect and dignity of people with severe mental illnesses, especially those of us who experience serious and persistent mental illness that has devastating effects on our lives and our dreams. He has always claimed us as well as being proud to have been from Nebraska, which could only be exceeded by how Nebraska is proud that he has come from us. Loyalty was another key word I thought about with Russell. A quote I found was, "An ounce of loyalty is worth a pound of government." Russell has a lot of ounces of loyalty in him to this day. Another word was leadership. To lead people, walk beside them. As for the best leaders, people do not notice their existence. When the best leader's work is done, people say, "We did it ourselves." I cannot count the number of times that Russell was that kind of leader. The final test of a leader is that he leaves behind him in other people the conviction and the will to carry on. Russell did that in a very large way. Russell did something that was very wise that I learned from him. Russell was always looking for and then training his replacement, which is the sign of a genuine advocate, someone who is always looking for that next person that they can help gain empowerment to be an advocate as well. I can't also tell you the number of times that that job fell to me. He was always training and inspiring and motivating and trusting his replacement that they would be adequate to the job, which gave us what we needed to do to be a leader. He was also extraordinarily gracious about stepping aside to allow others to grow. After he had served as the chair of the Mental Health Planning Council for some years, he was very gracious in stepping aside and allowing me to practice and use some of the leadership skills he had taught me. Another quote about leadership. My own definition of leadership is this: the capacity and the will to rally men and women to a common purpose, and the character which inspires confidence. And Russell, that's from General Montgomery. And Russell certainly had the capacity and the will to rally all of us to a common purpose. And he has a character that inspired confidence and loyalty. Another thing that I very much appreciated in Russell, because it is not something I have learned to do very well enough yet, which is Russell was always able to disagree agreeably. There was never a situation so heated that Russell was not gentlemanly and gracious and respectful. I'm still working on that one. Another key word I sought out when I was thinking about this award was integrity. And this comes to mind from Abraham Lincoln. Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. There have been a lot of occasions where Russell has had power, and he has always used it in a way that showed great integrity. Nothing is easier than saying words when you're talking about integrity. Nothing is harder than living with them day by day. Russell has not only said the words and lived with them day by day, Russell has lived with them year by year, and I consider myself, with you among us, to be very fortunate that now Russell is saying the words and he's living them decade after decade, because we're entering into our second decade of knowing Russell. Another word I thought of thinking of Russell was commitment. George Eliot had this to say about Russell: keep true, never be ashamed of doing right, decide what is right, and stick to it. Russell had a situation of one of adversity in his life in Washington in the past few years, but he was committed. He kept true. He was never ashamed that he was doing the right thing, and he decided on what was right, and he stuck to it. He not only brought himself up, he not only brought justice to himself, he taught lessons in Washington, D.C. that will no doubt benefit others like Russell who follow in his footsteps. I think because of his courage and commitment and integrity, they will think twice before they do again to someone something that Russell had to stand up for a very long time to overcome the injustice. Competence. Now this is a word you have to apply. You're required to apply it to Grinnell graduates and law school graduates. Quality is never an accident. It is always the result of high intention. I have never known of an intention of Russell that wasn't a high intention, except for perhaps his menu choices. But he's also grown a great deal in that area. Some of us remember when we would go out for supper after a meeting, Tim remembers, and Russell would either like a hamburger or a hamburger or a hamburger. Russell, I've been with Russell in Washington, D.C. This boy eats things now that I don't eat. So. Competence. Quality humility is never that accident. It's always that result of high intention. Sincere effort, it's intelligent direction, and skillful execution. It represents the wise choice of many alternatives. Through the decade, Russell and I have known one another and been elbow to elbow as advocates. He is very good at finding the high intention, putting sincere effort into it. He is very good at keeping the direction on an intelligent plane. He is very, very skillful at executing the things you need to do to be a good leader. And he has always represented the wisest choice of all the alternatives. Another thing about Russell, which I'm sure his family is especially proud, is his humility. And I am going to copy this and send it to his brother so he can't deny all these things we said about it. Pride is concerned with who is right. Russell has always been concerned with true humility, which is humility is concerned with what is right. Russell has always been humble, and his humility comes from being concerned with what is right rather than pride from who is right. Another definition of humility was greatness in plain clothes. Okay. Russell, of course, has never been caught in plain clothes, but he has always been a man of the people. Perseverance is another word I thought of with him. You have not lived today until you have done something for someone else who can never repay you. I can't think of the number of times Russell has done that. Character. Never for the sake of peace and quiet deny your own experience and convictions. That's Dag Hammarskjöld in the UN. Russell has that kind of character where he would never, for the sake of ease or peace and quiet or getting ahead, deny his own existence or life experience or conviction. Leadership is the capacity and the will to rally men and women to a common purpose and the character which inspires confidence. This would be one of the chief things I would remember about Russell is his leadership. He had the capacity and the will to rally people around him to a common purpose and the character which inspired all of us and gave us all confidence and to stick with it until the job was done. First responsibility of a leader when he was working with us was to define reality. The last responsibility is to say, Lord, thank you. And Russell never neglected to do either of those things. In between defining reality, saying thank you as a leader, Russell became a servant. He's characterized as the kind of leader that's simply come like this. Leaders don't inflict pain, they bear the pain. And Russell did that for many of us many times, and for our causes many times. As others have, Tim has spoken before, Russell's courage. Thomas Paine says, I love a man that can smile in trouble, that can gather strength from distress, and grow brave by reflection. I know Russell has many times recently gathered strength from his own adversity and distress. He has grown brave by them, and then he has shared it with others, such as myself, who are also going through periods of adversity. Chief Seneca says, there's nothing in the world so courageous and admired as a man who knows how to bear unhappiness with courage. Russell had several years where he had to bear unhappiness with courage. The first thing many of you notice about Russell is the charisma, which was defined as charisma is the result of effective leadership, not the other way around. Effective leadership comes first, and then the charisma. Service is one of the last key words I thought of with Russell. Good leaders first must become good servants. Russell always served those he led. And the other key point was, let me pass. I have to follow them. I'm their leader. He was never the one to claim the glory. He was the one to support those who he was leading. Russell has a phenomenal sense of vision both for Nebraska people like us with disabilities involving mental illness, but for the world at large and how they treat people with disabilities as far as protecting their human rights and dignity. His kind of vision is like, the future belongs to those who see possibilities before they become obvious. I'm sure Tim and I and others, J-Rock and others can tell you the number of times that Russell saw opportunities for a vision before they became obvious to the rest of us. To be a successful visionary, one needs a vision of greatness for one's work. If we dream extravagantly, we will be inspired to forge a reality beyond the straitjacket of practicality. So many people have the idea, but they can't see past the barriers. Russell's visions were always so poignant that he could always get beyond the barriers and continue to motivate all of us to work for our goals. This is something particularly for Russell's mother and grandmother. Common sense is the knack of seeing things as they are and doing things as they ought to be done. And the last one is self-discipline. Russell has the kind of self-discipline that is very rare. I have never seen Russell, and I have seen him in many states, in many kinds of situations, in many venues. We have had some incredibly fascinating discussions in many boardrooms, but I have never seen Russell without the self-discipline to be gracious to all people in all situations. The last is from Will Wilson, which is, let me remind you, it is only by working with an energy which is almost superhuman and which looks to uninterested spectators like insanity that we can accomplish anything worth the achievement. Work is the keystone of a perfect life, which I believe is something that Senator Jensen mentioned. And Russell's work, I think, has been for all of us and with all of us the keystone of a life that I hope to him is as satisfying as it is inspiring to us. So Russell, if you would step forward. Russell's plaque is the ultimate measure of a man. It's not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. That's Martin Luther King. Nebraska Advocacy Services, Inc., the Center for Disabilities Rights, Law, and Advocacy, recognizes with respect and appreciation Russell D. Pierce, J.D., for his dedication and service to citizens of Nebraska with disabilities as a member of the Board of Directors from August 12, 1994 to May 15, 2001.
Thank you, CJ, for that tremendous words of comfort and tremendous words of encouragement. It is nice to know that there are people who think so kindly of you, even when the tide of events sometimes is against you. It's nice to know that you have friends. It's really remarkable to be back home, and sometimes in Washington they say, you don't have friends in Washington, you have interests. And sometimes when you're not on the right side of the political spectrum, which I sometimes find myself not being, you find that you don't have friends, you have interests. And if you're not on the agenda of one day, you sometimes feel that you're not on the right side of the Potomac River. I want to say that I am delighted to be here with you and to share in this occasion. I believe the 11th annual conference of the Consumer Conference here in Nebraska. I want to share with you a poem that I always start off my presentations with, a poem that has been very helpful to me during the trials and tribulations, the highs and lows of my life, some 44 years. You can tell I'm getting somewhat stressed out because I have a lot of gray in my hair. When I attended these conferences before, my hair was almost completely black, but now I have a few more strands of gray, which either I'm getting wiser or I'm getting older, or maybe both, I don't know. But I want to share with you a poem that has given me comfort and has given me a sense of satisfaction. And maybe this poem just strikes me as the importance of mothers in our lives, those nurturing influences that give us hope when sometimes we believe hope is not available to us. It's a poem by Langston Heath, and he's one of my favorite poets, and it's called Mother to Son. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpets on the floor, bare. But all the time, I've been a-climbing, and reaching landings, and turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark, where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the step, 'cause you find it kinda hard. Don't you fall down now, for honey, I still a-going, I still a-climbing, and life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Life for me ain't been no crystal stair, and neither has it been a life strong with misery, but neither has it been a road that's been painted with silver and gold, neither has it been a road that's been painted with velvet or any other of the precious metals. The goal of a transformed mental health system taken from the President's New Freedom Commission report on mental health, Achieving the Promise, includes the following. Americans will understand that a mental health is essential to overall health. That mental health is essential to overall health. If there's one thing that I want to remind you today, is that mental health is fundamental to overall health. We must not think of mental health as something separate from physical health. Do you understand what I am saying? That mental health is family and consumer driven. That mental health is family and consumer driven, not as an afterthought, but as family and consumer driven. That mental health will address disparities, and that disparities will be eliminated. That every mental health screening will be assessment and referral services will be common practice rather than the exception. That excellent mental health care will be delivered, and that research will be accelerated, and that the gap between research and science and practice will be eliminated, and that there will no longer be a 15 to 20-year gap between research and practice, and that technology will be used, and that better health care will be a result. These are the conclusions of the President's Commission on Mental Health. Let us hope that these findings will be put into practice and not based on a shelf. Let us hope so. I want to thank you for bringing me here today, but I also want to say that Nebraska is on the move, is on the march, that is reconfiguring and transforming its own mental health system. And thanks to you, thanks to Governor Johans, and thanks to Senator Jensen, that your roadmap to recovery is a roadmap to recovery, and is grounded in the belief that people want to work and live in their home communities, closer to their natural supports, including family and friends, and is consistent with the Olmsted decision that holds significantly that people should be allowed to live in their communities where treatment will be much more enhanced, and where there will be no undue financial burden on the state, and where integration is commenced at a reasonable pace. This is the goal of a transformed mental health system. Your conference, Mark, your conference is on the mark, on our own, both singularly and collectively. But it does not mean that we're on our own. It means that we're not alone in our recovery. On our own together does not mean that we're on our own. It means that we're on our own together in recovery. And that we will be on our own where choices will be understood and that will allow for better outcomes and instill hope and pride and stimulate motivation more so, and that we will not be consigned primarily to pre-assigned day treatment programs or find ourselves in a hospital ward where there is no room with a view, both literally and figuratively. In the United States, who has not been touched by a family member or a relative suffering from an emotional disorder or drug problem? Who has not been touched by a family member or a family member suffering from an emotional disorder or drug problem? Understand that some advocates will contend that we are not suffering from mental disorder. Just the opposite. Many of us are finding our own way, that we are thriving in community life and contributing to its vibrancy as citizens. We are thriving. Aren't some of us thriving? Thriving in community life, not suffering, but thriving, finding our own way, on our own, together, on our own, together. It has been documented that a majority of Americans receiving treatment in behavioral health conditions receive it not from specialized mental health centers, but from primary care physicians. Why? Because we feel more comfortable with our primary care physicians rather than with our specialized mental health practitioners. Health centers, as primary care providers to 15 million medically underserved individuals, are critical sources of behavioral health services to those with the highest unmet needs. In fact, some health centers report as many as 70% of their patients have behavioral disorders. A recent Kaiser Commission on Medicaid and the Uninsured study found that uninsured health center patients, many of them non-patients having recently been uninsured, tended to experience serious physical as well as mental illness, and new uninsured patients tended to delay seeking health care until their health problems got more severe. Moreover, nearly every health center interviewed reported increased volumes of patients with mental illness and alcohol and other addiction disorders among uninsured patients, often causing longer waiting times for appointments. Many of these patients need a level of intervention beyond their health center's capacity, however. Indeed, the number of patient encounters in primary health care settings may be underreported given health center and Medicaid reimbursement policies. In this country, in any given year, about 5 to 7% of adults have a serious mental illness according to several national studies. However, if milder mental disorders are included, about 40 million adults aged 18 to 64, or 22% of the population, have a diagnosis of a mental disorder. About 20% of children, are estimated to have disorders with at least mild functional impairment, and those with serious mental disorders make up approximately 5 to 9% of children 9 to 17 years of age. In 2002, an estimated 22 million Americans aged 12 or older were classified with substance abuse dependence or abuse, or 9.4% of the total population. So why do we focus on prevention and recovery? Why do we focus on prevention and recovery? While the social and psychological effects are enormous, the economic cost to society to treat these illnesses are staggering. National expenditures for mental health and substance abuse in 1997 were estimated to be $82.2 billion. Mental health care is the largest component of that estimate, as 86% or $70.8 billion was for treatment for mental illness, and 14% or $11.4 billion was for substance abuse. Amazing. Americans spent more on mental health and substance abuse treatment in 1997 than they did on computer software. In 1995, they spent more for these disorders than the amount for treatments of most other types of diseases, including cancer, injuries, and respiratory diseases. Washington is an exciting place, especially when you start talking about the integrity of the public fist or treasury. But it is also an exciting place because it has many exciting monuments, including great public malls and parks and museums, and my favorite, the restaurants. It is the home of the Smithsonian, the Kennedy Center, and a hub of national and political life and the chattering classes. In all of my talk, I have learned a few things in agreement with you, that local people solve local problems best, that people support what they help create, and that science matters. Let me repeat. Local people solve local problems best, and that people help what they